Coming up on Arirang News, talk of Kim Jong-un coming to South Korea later this year for a big multilateral summit. Far from confirmed, but President Moon Jae-in is welcoming the idea so long as there's progress in the nuclear talks. The Bank of Korea decides, as expected, to keep interest rates steady for now. It's caught between a rock and a hard place, some say, but a cut is expected before the year is out. And Japan approves a shipment to South Korea of a key material for making semiconductors. It's a restricted item under Tokyo's trade curbs, but analysts say this doesn't mean a change of heart in Japan. It's 4:00 p.m. here in Seoul. Thanks for joining us on Arirang News. I'm Devin Whiting. South Korea will be hosting a multilateral summit this November focused on its relations with Southeast Asian countries. And there's been talk of an invitation going out to North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. President Moon Jae-in said his attendance would be very meaningful. Our presidential office correspondent Shin Se-min reports.
South Korea's presidential office has expressed its openness to possibly inviting North Korean leader Kim Jong-un to the Korea-ASEAN special summit that will be held in South Korea's southeastern port city of Busan in November. In a written interview with the Bangkok Post ahead of his week-long trip to 3 Southeast Asian nations from Sunday, President Moon said Kim's attendance would be very meaningful for peace on the Korean Peninsula and in East Asia. But he added that any decision on the matter would depend on progress made in the Korean peace process and the nuclear talks between North Korea and the U.S. What matters most, he said, is for the regime to actually put denuclearization into concrete action. He suggested ASEAN play a key role in urging North Korea to abandon its nuclear weapons program and to stand together through economic cooperation. That idea of inviting Kim Jong-un to South Korea was first raised last year by Indonesian President Joko Widodo and was quickly endorsed by a number of regional leaders.
북한이 비핵화 조치를 진정성 있게 실천해 나갈 경우 아세안이 운영 중인 여러 회의체에 북한을 참여시키고 북한과의 양자교류 협력이 강화되길 바랍니다.
Touching on the sudden uptick in Seoul-Tokyo tensions, President Moon said he's ready to embrace and cooperate with Japan should it decide to return to the negotiating table. He highlighted how Japan's trade measures not only damage South Korea, but the global economy as a whole. He said ASEAN members should do what they can to steer Japan to the path of dialogue and diplomatic consultation. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
North Korea's rubber-stamp parliament held its second meeting of the year on Thursday, and there, the regime revealed ways to further strengthen its leaders' legal power. But nothing was announced about the denuclearization talks with the U.S. Oh Jung-hee reports.
North Korean leader Kim Jong-un is further cementing his already hefty grip on power. On Thursday, Pyongyang state-run Korean Central Television revealed the result of the North's rubber-stamp parliament meeting held earlier in the day. It said the Supreme People's Assembly modified parts of Constitution to strengthen the authority of Kim Jong-un and the State Affairs Commission, the North Korean government's top decision-making body, which is headed by Kim. 3 major changes were made. First, the chairman of the State Affairs Commission, who is Kim Jong-un, does not double as a member of the parliament. Second, Kim proclaims the Assembly's various legislation and makes the key decisions at the State Affairs Commission. Lastly, Kim can appoint or dismiss North Korea's diplomatic envoys to other countries.
Therefore, the chairman of the State Affairs Commission, who represents our country, now has a stronger legal status, and his leadership is firmly guaranteed.
Kim Jong-un is now considered completely separate from the assembly as the regime's leader only. Plus, Kim now designates overseas envoys, which in the past was done by the chairman of the Presidium of the Supreme People's Assembly. This means even greater power in Kim's hands, adding to his status as the ceremonial leader of the state that was granted at the North's previous parliamentary session in April. Because the meeting took place amid no signs of working-level negotiations between Pyongyang and Washington, There was speculation Kim Jong-un could give a speech to clarify his stance on talks with the U.S. like he did in April. However, that did not happen as Kim didn't appear at Thursday's session. The regime's 5-year economic development plan, which is due in 2020, doesn't seem to have been covered either. Oh Jung-hee, Arirang News.
The annual meeting of culture and tourism ministers from South Korea, China, and Japan took place in Korea's western port city of Incheon today. There they signed a joint agreement called the Incheon Declaration to promote cultural exchanges and cooperation between all three countries. Our Kan Hyung-woo has this story.
The culture ministers of South Korea, China, and Japan have vowed to redouble their efforts to expand and develop cultural exchanges and cooperation over the next decade.
The three nations agreed to promote exchanges by future generations, and as for the Fourth Industrial Revolution, the three countries pledged to cooperate to achieve harmony and development of culture and science technology.
Signing the Incheon Declaration, the three ministers, South Korea's Park Yang-woo, China's Ro Soo-gang, and Japan's Masahiko Shibayama, all agreed that cultural exchanges and cooperation should be based on mutual trust and respect. Following the signing ceremony, South Korea's Suncheon, China's Yangzhou, Japan's Kitakyushu have been named as the 2020 East Asian Culture Cities, which will be working with one another to boost cultural exchanges. Before the South Korean and Japanese tourism ministers sat down for their afternoon meeting, a local civic group held a protest in front of the meeting venue, calling for a boycott of the 2020 Tokyo Olympics over concerns of radioactive contamination. The civic group delivered its petition to a Japanese official and called upon Tokyo to halt their, quote, economic retaliation measures. But according to a South Korean Culture Ministry official, the culture ministers of Seoul and Tokyo implicitly agreed to put aside matters like the ongoing disputes over trade, forced labor, comfort women, and the end of a military intelligence sharing pact between the two nations. The worsening relationship between South Korea and Japan was not brought up during the ministerial level talks here at the Songdo Convention. Instead, they decided to put more focus on ways to promote cultural exchanges and cooperation. Kan Hyung-woo, Arirang News.
Now, South Korea and Japan have called off a lot of events lately because of the difficulties between them, but this Sunday, the Korea-Japan Hanmadang Festival will be taking place in Seoul. South Korea's Vice Foreign Minister Lee Tae-ho and Japan's Parliamentary Vice Minister for Foreign Affairs Norikazu Suzuki will be attending. Tensions between the two sides remain high because of Japan's unfair trade restrictions, so all eyes are on what they have to say. The event has taken place every year since 2005, when Seoul and Tokyo celebrated the 40th anniversary of normalizing their relations, and it's now become the biggest and oldest non-governmental event they hold. South Korea's National Assembly is holding confirmation hearings today for President Moon Jae-in's picks to lead the Gender Equality and Family Ministry and the Korea Communications Commission. Gender Equality Minister nominee Lee Jong-ok is facing questions about payments of late taxes that she made after being nominated. Han Sang-hyuk is tapped to head the KCC, and he's answering questions about his graduate thesis, which he's accused of plagiarizing. Lawmakers have vowed to screen them closely in terms of their competence and their ethics. As widely expected, South Korea's central bank today decided to freeze its key rate for the month of August. The BOK is under some pressure to cut interest rates, but at the same time, lower rates have major risks of their own. Kim Ye-sung reports.
The Bank of Korea on Friday kept its benchmark interest rate unchanged at 1.5%. This comes after the bank cut rates by 0.25 percentage point last month, citing a slowing economy in what was its first cut in 3 years. Growing uncertainties over the ongoing U.S. China trade dispute and Japan's export restrictions on South Korea have put pressure on the bank to cut rates, but a back-to-back rate cut might signal that the economy is in crisis, prompting the bank to keep rates steady for August. The last consecutive cuts occurred during the global financial crisis. Also, the South Korean won has weakened by over 8% against the U.S. dollar this year to more than 1,200 won against the greenback, so cutting rates too soon could knock the won even lower, creating capital flight risks. But a rate cut is expected in October or November this year as data shows the domestic economy remains sluggish. Exports, a key driver of South Korea's economic growth, are set for a contraction for the 9th consecutive month on weak global demand. For the first 20 days in August, exports tumbled 13% on year to less than $25 billion, with chip sector shipments plunging 30%. Consumer sentiment is at a 31-month low this month, and headline inflation remained below 1% through July, lower than the bank's 2% target. Kim Hae-sung, Arirang News.
Now, for the first time since Japan's trade restrictions took effect, Japan has approved the first shipment to South Korea of hydrogen fluoride, a key material in making semiconductors. But Seoul says this does not mean there's been a dramatic change of heart in Tokyo. Our Oh Soo-young has the details.
According to Seoul's Trade Ministry Thursday, Japan has given the green light for the first batch of hydrogen fluoride exports to South Korea since it introduced tougher trade control measures on 3 key tech materials for South Korean firms. The hydrogen fluoride was reportedly requested by Samsung Electronics, although the exact amount was not confirmed. The substance is one of the 3 key materials used in the production of semiconductors and displays, which Japan targeted as part of its export curbs on South Korea. While Japan has since then approved the export of photoresist to South Korea on 2 occasions, this is the first time it has allowed a shipment of hydrogen fluoride since its trade measures took effect in July. The Abe administration insists the substance needs rigorous screening as it could be used as poisonous gas. As Japanese firms account for 70% of the world's hydrogen fluoride market, Tokyo's restrictions have raised concerns that they will slow down the production of South Korea's memory chips, which are used by major global tech firms including Apple, Dell and Sony. Japan's exports of hydrogen fluoride to South Korea plunged 84% on year in July, according to South Korean media. The South Korean government has been rolling out support measures for local companies in order to reduce the nation's dependence on imported substances and instead foster homegrown technology and essential materials. It said Thursday that Japan's approval of a hydrogen fluoride shipment does not indicate a change in Tokyo's basic stance of taking economic retaliation against South Korea over political issues. It says Seoul will continue to urge Tokyo to remove its trade curbs. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
Despite the tensions between Seoul and Tokyo, the New York Times says that overall relations, especially in terms of business, will likely endure these trying times and come out the other end relatively intact. Lee Seung-jae has more.
South Korea-Japan relations are at their lowest point in recent memory, following Tokyo's move to formally remove Seoul from its whitelist of trusted trading partners. Despite South Koreans boycotting Japanese goods en masse and switching up their travel plans to avoid Japan, when it comes to bilateral business ties, they would be a lot more difficult to break. This is the view of the New York Times on Wednesday, U.S. time. According to its report, trade volume between the two neighbors currently amounts to about $85 billion a year. It added that Japan, in particular, holds considerable sway as the main supplier of essential raw materials and components that South Korea needs in its high-tech economic machine. The report quoted Rory Green, an economist who specializes in South Korea and China at the London-based analyst T.S. Lombard, as saying any serious attempt to shatter trade ties would be a disaster, adding that until South Korea is able to produce its own materials, a process that could take many years, the two countries have little choice but to stick together. The report went on to use South Korean firm Sejin Tech as an example. It builds intricate machines with over 1,300 parts for packaging foods like soup and kimchi. While many of its components are made domestically, some can only be sourced from Japan. However, it noted the sudden upswing in trade tensions between Seoul and Tokyo has left many small businesses in South Korea unprepared. Many experts seem to agree that while the trade conflict has left the two countries deeply at odds, The two are bound to each other whether they like it or not, and need to find a way to resolve their current issues. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
South Korea's industrial production and investments rebounded in July, but that doesn't mean the economy is necessarily healthy. According to data from Statistics Korea Friday, industrial output rose 1.2% on month, mainly in cars and chemicals. Facility investment went up by around 2%, led by logistics. But still, there was a slight decline in the indexes calculated by Statistics Korea to measure current and future performance across the economy as a whole. It's time now for an in-depth look at the global markets on this Friday, and for that I'm joined here in the studio by Dr. Kim Se-won, Professor of Economics at Ewha Women's University. Dr. Kim, thank you for coming in today.
Pleasure to be here.
Well, so the Bank of Korea in its policy meeting, as expected, kept interest rates where they are at 1.5%. What's the thinking there, and what does that mean going forward?
I think in today's interest rate decision meeting, Bank of Korea wanted to cut the interest rate by 0.25% because they see the current status of the Korean economy in a more negative way than Korean government does. But finally, they decided to freeze the interest rate because there was a big burden for decreasing interest rate by twice. So the big question as of now is how many times and how much Bank of Korea will be cutting interest rate by the end of the year.
Right. There is talk of October possibly, or even as late as December. Some analysts think that's more likely. What do you think?
I think the possibility of October interest rate of Bank of Korea is really high for two reasons. The first is the uncertainties from abroad is increasing seriously, mostly due to Abe administration sanction on Korean economy and U.S. China trade conflicts. And the second is there is high possibility that U.S. Fed will be cutting interest rate in September meeting. Then that altogether gives a big momentum in cutting interest rate by Bank of Korea in October.
And currency is tied into that too, though.
Exactly. Korean currency is really these days appreciating quickly. So that is another factor to be considered in determining interest rate in October.
Yes, indeed. Well, let's look at what happened this week. In particular, the Supreme Court sending Samsung heir Lee Jae-yong back to a lower court relating to the case with former President Park Geun-hye. That obviously has some impact on the stock, not too much, but when that was announced, what kind of impact will this have on the economy?
Well, if you take a look at the legal issue of the Samsung's bribery in terms of the economic views, it is a really bad news to both of Samsung and South Korean economy together. When Mr. Lee was imprisoned last year, actually Samsung did pretty well in managing their risk from outside and inside without the leader of the corporations. But at the same time, it is also true that Samsung's all important decisions like huge investments and merging another corporations were all delayed. So if that continues, it is true that Samsung's future business opportunities seriously hurt.
Yeah, let's stay with that leadership question because a final decision could be many, many months away on Lee Jae-yong's future. Can the company get by without him? How would it get by? And talk more about the leadership situation.
Well, Mr. Lee is vice chairman of the Samsung Electronics. That is the legal title of himself, but he's a de facto leader of the corporation. So according to the Korean way of business, it is true that he decides almost every decision from A to Z. So without Mr. Lee, for Samsung managers and staff, it is extremely difficult for making future investment and another research and investment. So at current circumstances, it is very difficult to Samsung Electronics and other Samsung affiliates companies to manage their companies without him.
And that has effects in the broader economy since it's such a big company.
That is true. To think of Samsung's economic impact on Korean economy, they cover like 20% of the export.
Right.
Only from Samsung Electronics. And the total market value of the Samsung Electronics and its affiliates covers like 25% of the total Korean stock market. So we are forced to accept the Samsung's economic power these days. So it is true that Samsung's location in South Korean economy is extremely important. But some says at the same time, it is appropriate time to correct Samsung's inappropriate behaviors related to political power and the economy.
Sure. Well, before we go, let's talk about Japan. Now that Korea is off the white list, they allowed this shipment of chemicals to come through to South Korea today. What does that mean for this conflict?
I think by the end of this year, it will be kind of difficult to resolve the Korea-Japan relation through diplomatic conversation. Actually, Abe administration did not specify the export items under restrictions because they want to see the response of the Korean governments and for the possibility of damages of the Japanese corporations. But because of that, the tension between two governments will be continued by the end of this year without any serious developments.
Got it. All right, Dr. Kim, that's where we'll have to leave it today. Thank you very much for coming in. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Now, from this Saturday, the United States will be hitting China with another 15% tariff on a list of goods worth some $125 billion. At the same time, President Trump has revealed that the two sides are resuming talks at, quote, a different level. Speaking on Fox News Radio on Thursday, Trump did not elaborate on what he meant by different level, but he emphasized the importance of getting results this time around. At the G7 summit earlier this week, Trump said China had expressed its desire to reach a trade deal with Washington. Beijing later denied there had been any such contact. Apple is reversing its long-held policy on iPhone repairs and will start supplying parts to independent shops. Apple said Thursday that it'll offer these independent repair shops access to parts, tools, and guides for common fixes that are not covered by warranties. The company said when a repair is needed, customers should have confidence the repair will be done right and is handled by a trained technician. The new program's free to join, but shops have to employ an Apple-certified technician. The program will launch first in the U.S. This weekend, Seoul Plaza is hosting a global cultural festival with 70 countries represented through food and cultural performances. The Seoul Friendship Festival has been held every year since 1996. It starts on Saturday with a parade by 16 dance teams dressed in their country's traditional clothing. There will be dancers from 5 continents and along the Cheonggyecheon Stream, international food to try. South Koreans are shopping more online than ever, using their computers and phones. In the second quarter of this year, online sales were up by double digits, and now most of it's done using mobile devices. Yoon Jung-min reports.
A growing number of people in South Korea are using e-commerce, including online and mobile shopping.
I usually search for cosmetics and clothes with my phone. Shopping with mobile phones is convenient because I can compare prices straight away.
I can buy clothes and other things easily with my phone. I don't have to go around lots of stores and the goods are delivered right to my door.
According to Statistics Korea, online transactions in the second quarter of this year amounted to some $27 billion, up 18% from the previous year. And mobile shopping made up nearly 64% of all online transactions. The data shows that sales for food and home appliances increased from April to June, driven by people who prefer to stay home. Fashion items and cosmetics were also popular.
The total revenue for online shopping is expected to reach more than $110 billion this year. The market is growing 20% every year. That's because of higher smartphone usage, which is around 95%, and good internet infrastructure.
The data also shows that more people traded with foreign buyers or sellers in the second quarter. People in South Korea sold goods online worth more than $1 billion to overseas buyers and also bought more than $730 million of products from overseas traders. Major traders were based in the U.S., the EU, China, and Japan, and various goods ranging from clothing to cosmetics were bought and sold.
With a growing number of people shopping online, e-commerce is already a large part of Koreans' everyday lives. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
And that brings us to the end of this newscast. Thank you for watching. More live news coming your way at 7 p.m. Korea time.